Rich Dad explained to me that one of the differences between rich people and poor people comes from what the parents teach their kids at home. He said, Mike already had a personal investment portfolio of over $200,000 by the time he was 15. You had nothing. All you had was the idea of going to school so you could get a job with benefits. That is what your dad thought was important. Rich Dad reminded me that his son Mike knew how to be an investor before he left high school. I never tried to influence him in his choice of careers, said Rich Dad. I wanted him to follow his interests, even if it meant he did not take over my business. But whether he chose to be a policeman, politician, or a poet, I wanted him to first be an investor. You'll become far richer if you learn to be an investor, regardless of what you do to earn the money along the way. Years later, as I met more and more people who came from well-to-do families, many of them said the same thing. Many of my wealthy friends said that their families started an investment portfolio for them when they were very young, and then guided them in learning to be investors, before they decided what type of profession they wanted to enter. Mental Attitude Quiz. In the industrial age, the rules of employment were that your company would employ you for life and take care of your investing needs once your working days were over. In 1960, the average length of retirement before death was only 1 year for men and 8 years for women. In other words, all you had to do was focus on the E quadrant and your employer would take care of the I quadrant. That message was very comforting, especially to my parents' generation, since they lived through a horrible world war and the Great Depression. Those events had a tremendous impact upon our mental attitude and financial priorities. Many lived with that financial attitude, and they often taught that same attitude to their children. Many people also continue to believe that their home is an asset and their most important investment. That idea is an industrial age way of thinking. In the industrial age, that was all a person needed to know about money management because the company or labor union and the government took care of the rest. The rules have changed. In today's information age, most of us need greater financial sophistication. We need to know the difference between an asset and a liability. We are living much longer and therefore need more financial stability for our retirement years. If your home is your biggest investment, then you're probably in financial trouble. Your financial portfolio needs to be a much bigger investment than your home. The good news is that the I quadrant is a great quadrant to place as a top priority and to learn to be responsible for, because freedom comes from this quadrant. So, the mental attitude questions are: 1. Which quadrant will you place first? Which is the most important to you? 2. Which side of the table do you eventually plan to sit on? I have asked question 2 because of this phenomenon. You may have noticed that when a major company announces a layoff of thousands of employees, the company's share price often goes up. That is an example of the two sides of the table. When a person shifts to the other side of the table, his or her point of view of the world also changes. And when a person shifts quadrants, if only mentally and emotionally, then loyalties often change. I believe that this shift is brought on by the change of ages, the change from industrial age thinking to information age thinking. This shift will create some of the biggest challenges in the future for businesses and business leaders. The rules have just begun to change. Chapter 14. Investor Lesson Number 14. Basic Rules of Investing. One day, I was feeling frustrated about my financial progress in life. I had about 4 months before I was to leave the military and enter the civilian world. I had stopped all efforts to get a job with the airlines. I had decided that I was going to enter the business world in June of 1974 and see if I could make it in the B quadrant. It was not a hard decision since Rich Dad was willing to guide me, but the pressure to become financially successful was building. I felt that I was so far behind financially, especially when I compared myself to Mike. During one of our meetings, I shared my thoughts and frustrations with Rich Dad. I've got my two plans in place. One plan is to ensure that I have basic financial security, and the other